Okay, let's try this again. Testing 1, 2.
It's good to be the king.
It's sad to be the king, and the sad thing is I don't want to be anything if I can't be, but I can be the king, and I am. I can want to die and not say why. In a way you can get, cause I'm the
Hello?
king and I'm fine.
Testing,
You're not the king yet, and you're all gonna die, so I told you the rule
testing,
you seem to
testing.
forget.
Yeah,
It's
it's
good to be
working.
the king.
Hello? Testing. Okay. Excellent. All right, reply to Hythloday. So first of all, Hythloday, you appear kind of smug about certain things, and I just want to say you're in a glass house. Try to remember when you're waggling your little finger at those ideas of mine you find uh, unbelievable. Uh, you are in league to deny 100 years of science at a level where it would have had to be a massive fraud. Not just that they have a next step to figure out. You want to rewind 100 years. And Gary, you like to entertain Gary's theory, and that is denying like 450 years from Galilean relativity, from which, relativity is derived. Um, and you guys might think that you're in line with Newton. That seems to be a popular thing, but um, even that, I don't really think so. I mean, like the whole Turing machine thing in physics. Let's think about this. Now, we know you can't simulate physics with the Turing machine because even with Newtonian mathematics, it immediately gets too complicated to calculate exactly with the Turing machine. And what you could say with complexity theory that, well, given enough time, a Turing machine could calculate it. Given infinite time, in any finite amount of time, it can only come up with an approximation. So your theory that the brain might be a Turing machine, fine, because the brain's making an approximation. Maybe it is a Turing machine by that one criterion, but the universe itself can't be approximating what happens in that n-body problem in a solar system. It's getting it exactly right by definition, yeah? So a Turing machine, it can't be. So the universe, even a Newtonian universe, has features that a Turing machine can't do, and that's mathematically proved in complexity theory. Okay, so I'm referring to a line of reasoning. So you just shouldn't really throw so many stones. You should just buckle up and handle the theories that are given to you clearly, and you'll find if you can follow logical argument that in fact I am the one following the kinds of rules that you're talking about, except for that you misunderstand a few things along the way, things about what we're absolutely sure of. Um, so, okay, to be clear, what I'm absolutely sure of, and where my basic propositions, I don't make a supposition that the eye is special. We'll get to that. Um, what I am absolutely sure of, by the traditional and your meaning of absolutely sure of, is that a film strip is happening, right? You have to be that careful when you put it, right? Like I didn't say I'm seeing a film strip because that would be assuming about me. It's just that a film strip, the whole thing, I'm going to name it film strip, and that it's happening. I'm invoking that somehow time is a part of it automatically. So you could say the film strip exists and derive your notion of time from the film strip. Um, well, let's not do that at the moment. The film strips is happening. What is happening mean? What if I have an illusion about people that are determinists like yourself? Then, in a sense, um, the future and past are all just extant, and they are going to be whatever they're going to be is similar to them having a concrete reality already, since it's inevitable at least. And some people believe that that yeah, it's concrete in some sense. The future is out there, and we might have to change what it means for something to be happening. But it'll still be happening, this film strip, whatever the definition of happening you come up with. Now, to explain what's going on there, because I think you have trouble following this, I have use the same example for years and years because I think this is simple and everybody should be able to get this. It's like showing someone a syllogism to teach them syllogisms. This is like about illusion and illusion existing and things like this, and it has to do with what's going to happen with the word happen as we figure out more and more about time and what it means for something to happen. Right? The sunrise, that's an illusion, right? That's an illusion because the sun's not really moving. It's not really rising. Okay? It's what we call the phenomena still, even though we know that it's the sun rising, which we used to think it was the thing moving. The Earth spinning. Okay, we all know this, right? So imagine this phenomena of the sun rising, and when we believed that, our theory about what was going on was wrong. So wrong we named it after our theory, which was that the sun was rising. Because that seemed apparent, but really that's the sense in which appearances, could create an illusion. It just seems like it is what it is, and so you call it that, and then thousands, millions, whatever years later, you realize, oh, that's an illusion. We're actually spinning. The phenomena doesn't go away. So that's what I've been saying about things like the illusion of will, the illusion of I. All of these things we do have misconceptions of, absolutely, because all I'm absolutely saying exists. Well, my starting point, and I'm curious what your starting point is. I think you want to just assume one, but arbitrarily, my starting point is that the film strip is happening. And I assert that that's undeniable. And I'm making a guess here because I can never see inside somebody else's head. But I'm theorizing that a human being that says they don't have it is lying or wrong. I also think other animals have it. And the theory by which I think that is an inductive reasoning that has a limit somewhere. It's not exactly clear where, but I follow that induction all the way down to single-celled life forms and things that are clearly alive. Doesn't necessarily mean a living thing would have this conscious experience. That I'm not saying. If you could create something that counted as living, like by one of the definitions, or all of them, that you could come up with, it might, that didn't have the film strip because the criteria of that word that you're using, that definition of living, all those criteria were met, but met by something that can't generate a first-person stream of consciousness, stream of imagery, stream of the film strip, then you would have something that you called alive that didn't have that. So there's not as far as I know, there's no inherent relationship. I don't know which physical phenomena can cause it exactly or even that closely. I just know that it's happened once, and it looks like from the evidence and the nature of our study of the natural world that at least other humans have it. How are you going to justify that? How do you reason that another human has it? Because what I did was I said, well, I'm pretty convinced other humans have it. They can relay their experiences and all this stuff to give me a pretty good hint of that and break solipsism. And it just happens that those arguments, a lot of them, apply then to other animals. And so where it stops, nobody knows. All right. So that's about the I believe language. Everything else, when I say I believe something, it's because it's not that the film strip is happening. It's something implied by the information in the film strip. And so I have a theory and I believe. I also say it appears, blah, blah, blah. When I say it appears, that means I think it's pretty much right there in the film strip, right? If I say it appears that, space is three-dimensional and that all physical events can be placed in this three-dimensional space, that's what it appears like. I'm saying this is so ubiquitous that even though you could also argue it's a theory, and I'm saying technically that also is a theory, and not just technically, actually it is a theory, that it's apparent because it comes across to everybody that there's this 3D space. And I might say, well, it's not really 3D. I believe in string theory and it's 12D, which I don't, but for example, because it actually is still a theory of what space is like, but there's apparent parts of it, right, that we all tend to agree with. It appears that there's three primary colors of light, for example. I believe that it's well established that the three colors of light are what they are because of a neurological design, not because there's three classifications of visible light in reality, that it's a mechanical feature. So I believe that. And I could tell you why I believe something I believe, and it'll be based on data from the film strip. Always, in all cases, that's what I'm saying. That's why mine is more logically structured than you're even imagining, with arbitrary dichotomies or definitions that you seem to think that since you posit it, we can take it as if, yeah, or we can start with something that actually is undeniable, something that is the very definition of self-evidence, the only evidence there is, and it can't be denied that it's coming to us. We can ignore some of the evidence, but we can't ignore that there's this flow of evidence, of evident things, self-evident. Nobody has to work to make them evident in the first place. And then if we look into those things and do data reduction, and in some of those experiences are willing us to point our eyes. Hey, look over closer at that thing. And then you can actually direct and seem to get more information about a subset of something going on in this apparent three-dimensional world that seems apparent in the frames of the film strip directly. And probably for a dog who sees the world as arrayed out in these three dimensions, I would think. But who knows, really, right? So the arguments and beliefs get less and less well demonstrated. But at least in my case, I'm starting from one that's beyond the concept of demonstration itself comes from the fact that this phenomena of the film strip is undeniable. Nobody could bother to deny that's not happening to them. And it's information. What's information? You haven't defined information. Information, okay, starting from this data, all first definitions are from indication. You point at aspects, features, distinguishable features of the film strip, like color is distinguishable from sound. I mean, so distinguishable, orthogonal would be a word. Unreconcilable, just two totally different things. They could be called spaces unto themselves, even though sounds happen in space, physical apparent space, and color happens in space, and even if they are at the same location in space, they seem to be so separate. It's a lot like what a mathematician would call having their own space. So there's a color space and an audio space, and so I believe the outside world exists, right? So I believe that the information we get the film strip is evidence of other information. There are various ways to see that. Again, by the fact that I can go investigate something and have an experience of investigating that thing, and whether it's an illusion or not, that I'm actually willing myself to look for my keys. I have the experience of whatever this thing we call will is happening and me looking for my keys, right? I have an experience of that, and I'm getting more information that it seems to be out there, and I'm collecting it. And that's how it seems to be to most people from their experience. I'm talking about common aspects of this experience. Of course, some of the common aspects are going to be illusion for sure, like the color thing I was talking about. And you could say all of it's guaranteed to be an illusion because these are all models and maps. It's all information. In this theory that the outside world is this physically external thing that you and I both believe, this information would not be the stuff in that world. It would be related to it. It would be imprints, footprints in the sand from that other information. So the information is materially connected, as in material implications, and therefore related. And this theory is super, super strong. And you could say we're biased for it, just like for the will and other things. and I would put it on a par with our experience of will. This idea that there's an external world of information, and then we're getting information. And I do accept Susskind's idea of information for sure, and Seth Lloyd's, and that's quantum information ideas. And I'm not sure you understand Susskind's definition from what you said, though. All right. So I think the difference between us, you believe in the outside world, I believe in the outside world. I, I admit why. I will explain why. It's from the film strip. You seem to want to say, well, since I believe in the real world, doesn't matter I got that idea from the film strip. I can ignore the film strip and just start with my idea from the. No, because your idea of the real world is already a bunch of theories. Just there's no other starting point ever. It's always the film strip. You work way far away. It's just because you got to layers later on, where instead of pointing at something in the film strip and going, look, an apple, you have a genetic idea and concept of defining a fruit, and this one happens to be an apple, and you define it that way. Probably losing you there, but whatever. Susskind's idea of information is totally crucial to this idea that I have. It's one of the guys that I got my current idea of the physical world being information, because that's his whole invention and solution, though a lot of it's kind of funny because, not all of this is like assured to. He talks a lot of times too much like things were decided that actually haven't been decided yet. But this zeroth law of physics that, information isn't lost, sort of is part of this physicalization of information. So the commonality and the reason that the skeptical philosophy has been learned by so many scientists that themselves had all kinds of dogmatism, various kinds of philosophy, is because since it's in the terms of this evidence in the film strip, and you have to show me an experiment to prove what you're saying, means you have to give me an apparatus, a definition of an apparatus, that I could go ahead and build that apparatus, see the same thing you saw, and be convinced the same way you were. Right? So you have to convince me in terms of the film strip. You want to talk, we're only going to start from what's absolutely certain, then you don't get to just make up dichotomies out of whole cloth. You have to make them up, and those dichotomies have to categorize things in here. They have to indicate things that are evidence. And that's what I've done. So as far as what exists, I see you as continuing to be confused about the question of what exists in terms of there's information that exists. We also believe there's such a thing as physical existence, right? Non-representational existence. Now, I believe, like Susskind, that non-representational existence is still information. It is itself, and in a sense, that information represents itself, and that all makes a tremendous amount of sense in quantum mechanics, because the fact that there's entropy in actual physically measurable concept, complex though it is, of a system called entropy, is the part of the information that is unsettled, which as I'm saying, works great with quantum mechanics. So I'm happy to talk about some operator P of A, where an A is some feature out of the frames, like this mouse, right? Now it's in your frame. Right here, I'm having touch and other information about it. That's a physical thing. It takes up space, it has mass, it's a physical thing, and particularly mass. I mean, energy is also physical. This is too loud, I think. Hello? Hello? Turning that down. That looks too loud to me. I don't care what anybody says. See, that was low because I was muttering. So it's just that category of what defines something as physical is not absolute. I think energy is physical. Would your definition fit that? It's a useful category that, of course, might have subscripts. Physical according to this definition, physical according to that definition. And they're all going to be theories, because the only thing self-evident is the data that we get. And part of what an abstraction about when you look at the data and you have these experiences of will where you can double check data, you can run an experiment twice, and so on, you find that a lot of the what comes through the stream, though it's all information by definition, it's not all super reliable. Meaning, when you compare it to other information, sometimes there's an odd man out. It's like I ran this experiment 10 times and I got this number that was really close for these ones, but that one is odd man out. Probably fucked up that time, or there's an anomaly and it can happen 1 in 10 times. Or if you keep running an experiment, you might find out which it is. No matter what you're going to do, though, the only thing self-evident is the evidence. And in a way, you don't want to call that self-evident because since there's misleading information in there, you have to work hard to weed out the noise. And it didn't make it self-evident in the end when you looked. It's like the motion of the planets are self-evident, but it took what was it, Tycho Brahe, Tycho Brahe, whatever it is. It looks really, really close to get really, really good numbers about that. And even then, you just have from the point of view of Earth, and you have to do calculations to figure out what it really is in open space. Right? So something being self-evident because there's information, yeah, but there's a lot of thinking and analysis, including mathematical and numerical analysis, to get to data that's actually reliable. So the self-evident data is copious, but on the face of it, not particularly reliable. Even the rising of the sun needed a lot more analysis to turn out to be, for us to have a decent idea of what was really going on there. And we haven't bothered even to rename the phenomena. So I'm curious to know, because I think that it's quite clear that you have to accept the film strip claim, that that's your access into the world. And I'm curious if that's true, and if you think that there's a reason to deny that that you are experiencing this phenomena like the one I'm experiencing, insofar as I have reduced down to its basic, a bunch of information happening in your sensory and perceptual spaces. That's happening to you, I believe. Is there a way for someone to say it's not happening to them? Should I believe that? And if it is, then we can start from that. And we can go very quickly to figure out certain things, like there's 3 primary colors, and you can distinguish blue from red and green and yellow and purple just like I can. And we still couldn't assume that everybody has colors. There's colorblind, and there's other animals that have different numbers of colors and wavelengths that they see. So a lot of the stuff in the film strip, yeah, we need to keep our hands off when we're trying to start from an actually self-evident starting point. And there certainly is no axiomatic evident self-starting point. That has been tried and failed over and over and over and over and over now for a long time, which is one reason we have already a century of moving beyond that approach as our final or current approach. Now, I have not said that life is special. You go on and, oh, the will is special, I is special, life. No, you're the one that thinks it's special. That's why you don't want to have paramecium have it. Me, I'm willing to let anything have it, and I'm not trying to spread specialness out to the world, or I would put it in rocks. I'm not trying. I don't even care if they don't have it. I'm open to the theory that some human beings don't have it. Maybe something extra. Just having the biology means you can be around like a zombie. And some people, that's the NPC idea. That doesn't seem to be the case to me. My experiences with human beings don't point me in that direction, okay? But it definitely could stop somewhere. And there's also a question of collection. Like, if single cells have it, that doesn't mean that all multi-cell creatures have it. It's at that single cell level, maybe. So My theory is that it's associated with everything that's in a state of life so far. If we create some kind of computer thing that fits life, then who knows? It might be a different thing. Okay, surely I'll talk about that. So, for example, our refrigerator is a entropy pump. Any robot that repaired itself would be an entropy pump. So, given we're going to have robots that can repair themselves, and let's say, given they'll even be able to go out and mine the raw materials and whatnot and build the forges in order to make all their parts and everything, that would be an entropy pump that duplicated itself, assuming it also built new robots. Um, I believe you could do that with the Turing machine brain. Uh, that would fit this my favorite definition of living, but it wouldn't be. I don't believe it would be conscious. So it's possible to have something that would fit my particular definition of living, but that's also why it's like, yeah, I have a definition I like, but I'm not forgetting all the other ones. I'm learning as many definitions of what it means to be alive as possible. I'm interested in all the candidates. I don't think we're on a final answer. Even if the answer is in my direction, it'll probably need some extra explanation or better definition in the words that appear in that definition. So it seems to me, and I've said this for years, you and Gary are saying we're just these TikTok machines, and there's nothing special about us. We're just like any other chemical machine. But somehow this phenomena that's going on, as we say, in our head, that's super special. Other TikTok machines don't get to have that. You act like I'm the one that's saying dominoes must have a TikTok machine in their head turned into a stream of thought. No, I don't think that. You are the ones that should be held to that question. If you're just a TikTok machine, then why can't any TikTok machine? A waterfall is going downhill, splashing around and stuff. I don't know why can't it have one? And you could bring up arbitrary this and that, and like Gary used to say, oh, because neurons make the difference. Yeah, okay, so you've noticed what you think makes the difference. Great. The point is, if just a Turing machine can have one, then your computer might as well have one. And why not? I'm not saying life is special. I do believe life is special, but I don't know how special I'm saying it is when it goes down to every single little tiny speck of stuff. I have to wipe my table with chlorine sometimes, and I'm killing some of those guys. I'm a murderer. No, you're the one that's saying it's super special, right? It's just like when people were saying that cattle don't really feel pain and that's just a response through their muscle system kind of a thing, which they still said when I was a kid. I live in a ranch area. I'm sure there's probably ranchers still trying to hold that stuff. It's pretty obvious to me the reason is because they don't want to, that they're the ones there at the branding times. They don't want to feel like they're being that way for real. Okay. So anyway, whatever. It's explained pretty well my line of induction and why I take it that far. I've said also, okay, tell me why I should stop halfway. Where should I stop? I've asked you a billion times. Okay, start it yourself. You have to make an argument to even think another human has it and break out of solipsism. Once you have your out of solipsism argument, you tell me what else it doesn't apply to or does apply to. Okay, and if you don't get out of the solipsistic thing, fine. I'm interested in hearing that as well. But these things you're calling ambiguities and might seem so ambiguous are just things you haven't bothered to understand it, given all of this time. And again, you and Gary love to go, oh, I don't understand, but I can tell you your theories. Sometimes in your own words, I could put them in my words and show I understand them. You think the fact that I also disagree with them and tell you about the disagreements as I'm explaining, that's not what you actually have no idea and say these things are ambiguous. I'm not presupposing that there's an I and then going from that. I'm only supposing there is a film strip for everybody. Everybody has one. That's what I'm starting with. That's it. Everything else is just theories drawn from the information in the film strip, correlating the information, triangulating on things like, oh, look, there's a sound, there's light. Oh, look, I could go touch it. Yes, there's a cat over there. But there's not. My cat is not right there right now. That was just for demonstration. I, will, information. These things, I'm all defining them by pointing at the film strip. Information, by definition, this is what we're calling the pieces of the film strip information, because the film strip, what else to call it? We are pointing at the film strip going, okay, that's the start. That's information. Is the universe information? We used to think, no, just the ideas are information. The universe is the thing in itself. And I think with Susskind and Lloyd and stuff that we're going, you know what? The thing in itself is also information. It's a kind of information. There really is no difference. The state of a machine is information. The state of a machine is its state. It is both of those things. Information and state. We've had two different words that turn out to be the same thing. Information, physical existence. They're both conserved. They both follow a material implication, a logical implication. And neither one can be completely simulated in finite time by a Turing machine. Complexity theory, which is a computer theory you could look up. You might know what it is already. Everybody, not just Hythloday, audience. Okay, you say, I posit a mysterious mechanism that would limit Turing machines, so that a Turing machine cannot create a living, a conscious thing. And I acknowledge you, by some definitions, including my favorite definition, you could conceivably build something that we would then call living, but it would be non-conscious living. Or we might decide we need to change the definition, or one of the other candidates was better, We might do any of those things. Well, let's just say I love my definition so much, I'm just going to stick with it in that case. I don't mind calling this kind of a robot, self-sustaining robot, living, but I don't think that it's conscious. And I posit a mysterious mechanism required. No, the mysterious mechanism is chemistry, and the fact that you cannot use a Turing machine to simulate a chemical reaction in a finite amount of time. It would take at best an infinite amount of time, just like you could have celestial mechanics exactly modeled in the Ptolemaic epicycle system, but you need an infinite number of epicycles. So in the same, which is a totally true thing, by the way, there's some very interesting things, like there's epicycle systems that trace out Homer Simpson, because you can actually trace any path given enough epicycles, and 20 or 30, a couple hundred is enough. Anyway, tangent. So the special mechanism is chemistry, which Turing machines cannot do. And this is proven because a Turing machine is an abstract thing that you can do mathematical proofs about, and you cannot, there are chemical processes that cannot be modeled in finite time in a, they can only be approximated, right? So complexity theory about chemistry and Turing machines shows that there's not something not in the Turing machine concept that is happening in chemistry, because the universe is not approximating itself, it's getting itself exactly right. Okay, so your idea that there's no evidence of anything besides these Turing processes in the mind, well, the mind operates by chemical processes, so proved you wrong, destroyed you. Okay, turns out I'm defining everything the only way possible if you really want to be strict about your requirements. And the reason that's the case is because in my teenage years, I went to philosophy school, and they presented tons and tons of this stuff. I took every logic class that was offered while I, was there, and that I could take. and there were graduate things probably I couldn't take and whatnot. I'm not saying I took every class, but they don't offer every semester. They rotate through what kind of logic things they do. You got to keep an eye. So I kept an eye out, and they presented, they also are like philosophies about making compelling ideas, and I'm like, it shouldn't be made about compelling ideas. It should be about making good, well-structured arguments that other people can judge for themselves. So that was one way I conflicted with them. But I love logic, and one reason I did philosophy is because my mom had said, "Okay, go do whatever you want in college, but don't take don't get a philosophy degree." And so I took Logic 1A, and it was like, one, I loved it. I loved it. Plus, it came totally naturally. It's like, oh my God, these are the rules of thinking I've been trying to tell other people. I didn't know these were written down. I, until then, it hadn't occurred to me that I had gotten those rules like through osmosis because some people had put them out there in the culture enough that, especially if you like science, you could reabsorb them, but it was no coincidence, the similarity. Um, and then you learn things where you were doing it differently or whatever, or ways you have to, like with conditions. Um, so anyway, my system is built with the idea of I want to shove information through a logical system in order to get better ideas, reduce data, reduce the noise, do image processing techniques, data processing techniques. This is the system I came up with. See, if these are the objects that go into the predicates, it all works out. Everything after here is logical. You can make your arbitrary thing. The color red is this wavelength to that wavelength of light. The kind of photon is called that color. You can do that because you know how that maps back to here. It's a set of things. You've built a little indicator and it indicates things out of there. Certain photons fall into that set. One little nanometer angstrom off in its wavelength and doesn't count. It's not red. Fine, you can do that. Totally. And we just will see how arbitrary those distinctions you made were and whatnot. As long as remember your little letter P on what is physical or what is spatial or any of those are sets of where you're trying to work with this data. They are not themselves self-evident. Only the data is self-evident. And remember, it's also self-evident that you just put the lightest restrictions, like, must be physical, must have weight, any little thing, and you just get this a lot of things will not be captured. And that's how we make the distinction of falsely thinking that these ideas and concepts somehow were in some other realm, needed to be treated differently. Now, they're part of the same structure. This is the self-evident data, and then we can use first order or any other kind of logical system where these are the inputs. None of our principles, however, get to be the starting point. That's what people don't like. They want their principles, except for you were complaining about people that are starting their argument from their principles, like human's a body. Look, everything I can draw from that. Right. To me, human is property. I mean, you're your own property. Look what you can draw from that was one of your examples. Another example you had talked about was somebody sees God. And by the way, I'm not going to distinguish from when you went to, as far as I'm concerned, you're making these videos together. When you switch and start saying something to Gary, whatever, if I take a note, I'm going to talk about it, whether it was to me or not. If you have to go, oh, but that was to the other person in your case, then that's your problem for trying to juggle both of us at once. I got a video I had to respond to, so I had to watch the whole thing, so I'm responding to the whole thing. But somebody who believes God because they experience themselves, what would I say? I would say that if that person's telling you the truth and they experienced something and they are calling that something God, what they experienced was something in their film strip. Probably an emotion that they're calling God. They felt love. It felt so good. They're like, oh my God, I would worship this feeling. That's God was there. Or maybe they had a physical hallucination. They saw in the sky a big giant face looking down and talking to them. And it was just a hallucination, like 100% neural. It was in the film strip. It existed. It's like seeing ghosts. Nope. Yeah, but ghosts are illusions. You didn't see anything. Well, they had the experience they saw, but this is real. Don't get confused. The nature of what ghosts are, physical versus not, just changes who should study it, right? Physicists probably don't need to study ghosts much more. They've done enough, probably, but if some want to, whatever. But on the other hand, psychologists should study ghosts, right? So it just changes what the subject matter is, you know? It's like when it turns out that the sun isn't rising because it's drug across the sky and by a chariot, by a god, uh, then the physicist can start studying the sun, and the theist should probably move on. So, is it possible to have a conscious AI? If it was conscious, I'd say it was a real I. So to me, that would be like, what if we build, what if we built a cell, a multi-celled animal, but it was brand new, and we didn't splice any genes. Sure, we looked at genes, but then using what we learned about genes, we wrote our own gene encoding machine and whatnot, and created a living creature that was just basically a brand new biological living creature. Well, of course, I imagine that could be conscious. But would it be artificial intelligence? No. Now, you mean conscious AI in a Turing machine? No, I'm pretty sure that complexity theory rules that right out. No, if we get fast enough. No, I don't think it's a matter of that. That's not how that shit scales. There's certain scaling problems because of complexity theory that you don't actually solve with Moore's law. It's just a fact. Could explain it more if anybody followed even to understand what's being told there. I think it's on you to show that it is possible, given the limitations of Turing machines. Why would you think it is possible? And if it is possible, why doesn't the computer have it right now? Well, why would it not already have it? What's the difference? What do you think? It's just a special algorithm, and then suddenly it starts having an internal. No, it's some sort of physics, right? It's some sort of physics. Why you would think that the computer has that physics, and that's the assumption. We should assume that the computer has all the physics necessary to simulate a human brain. Why? It's missing a fucking lot of physics of the human brain. It would be silly to assume that. I mean, maybe. I see why a lot of people, I mean, it's very popular. The AI researchers and computers, they just think they're going to get to this singularity. Well, they got bad news because the complexity of the human brain, every neuron is as complex as they're pretending the brain is. They're treating every neuron like it's a simple flippity bit switch too. I don't think so. Prove me wrong. So the thing about the amoeba versus the human is, this is the challenge. This is the, at least answer this question. If you ignore everything else, how do you make the argument that another human being has one of these film strips? You think I have the film strip. How do you make the argument from what you know, the data you've got, that I also have a film strip, right? Then see if that applies to dogs. Do you believe the dogs have a film strip? Do the arguments that say another human, do they work for the dogs? If not, make another argument about why you believe the dogs have it. And go as far as you need to get a little inductive structure. So you see, I keep arguing from myself to another person with this argument. Oh, I had to adjust it just a little, one step to get to other mammals. And then I'm adjusting it another step probably to get to reptiles. And then another step to get to insects. Oh, no, I'm going to stop before insects. Tell me why where do you stop? Because you can't just ignore the question if you're going to say other people have it, because that's the problem of solipsism. Okay, and that's the first problem any philosopher needs to solve for themselves. Unless the first problem is, why keep living? That's the first problem. according to Camus. And so, in a sense, you could say it's the only problem of philosophy. So, right. But once you've done that and you're saying, well, what about the world then that I am not leaving? Then you go, hey, what about this solipsistic thing? You think anybody else has this internal consciousness? How do you make that leap? And how do you stop making that leap? How do you justify stop making the leap further into other living things? All right, cheers.